Howdy again everyone, and today I'm putting together a short video to check out how the Nikon version of an interesting new autofocus Viltrox lens performs, their new 16mm f1.8 autofocus. It's a full frame or FX camera lens, and anyone who's seen my original review of it over on Sony E-mount will know that this lens is not only very reasonably priced at about £450 or $550 US, but also very sharp. I remember being very pleasantly surprised by its performance, not to mention that fantastically ultra wide angle and the very bright maximum aperture of f1.8 that it offers. Does this Nikon version perform as well as the Sony version though? I'm going to compare how the Nikon Z version handles its electronics and autofocus and how sharp its images look on a 45 megapixel Nikon FX sensor, and that's the highest resolution Nikon has to offer at the time of making this video. If you want to find out more about the lens and how its optics perform, then take a look at my detailed full review down in the description below, and if I remember I'll pin it in the comments too. And thanks to Viltrox too, who've sent this lens for testing, although as usual this is a totally independent test. The build quality is about the same as before, metallic, big and solid. It comes with an attractive orange weather sealing gasket, as well as a USB-C port here for future firmware updates. The aperture and manual focus rings still turn the same way, smoothly and a little heavily. The aperture ring can be set to click at every third of an f-stop, but it can't be locked in or out of automatic mode. The manual focus response to turning it is fairly nice and smooth here, as you can see. We still see very little in the way of focus breathing too. Just like on Sony E-mount, the lens's autofocus motor runs silently, accurately and fairly quickly. It had no trouble with subject tracking or anything like that, it worked perfectly fine. So overall, the build quality of this Nikon version is well up to scratch. It's working absolutely fine on my Z7, even down to the neat, if somewhat gimmicky, backlit screen on the top. Admittedly, that could be useful when shooting in the dark, say for astrophotography. Anyway, let's see what its image quality is like on a 45 megapixel full frame sensor of my Nikon Z7 then. These pictures are taken with automatic corrections turned on. In the middle of the image at f1.8, we are seeing brilliant sharpness and contrast right away, and over in the corners, the image is a little softer with lower contrast, but for an ultra-wide lens on a 45 megapixel camera, this is still really quite impressive. f2 looks about the same, but f2.8 in those corners looks much brighter and crisper, with very good contrast now. f4 and f5.6 look essentially perfect, which is great to see. The lens stays this sharp down to f11, where a little softness is creeping in due to diffraction, and f16 and f22 look fairly soft for the same reason. So, is it any different from the Sony version? Not really, which is good news for Viltrox's quality control. For the money you're paying here, it's still an impressive performance with plenty of sharpness right into the corners and even at f1.8. When it comes to vignetting and distortion, performance against bright lights, chroma levels and bokeh, well, naturally all that stuff is the same as the original Sony lens, so check out my full detailed review to find out more about those. Overall though, the Nikon Z mount version of this good value lens continues to be a really nice performer, especially as it only costs about $500. This thing could be useful for any ultra-wide application, but that bright aperture offers an artistic touch, as well as the potential for astrophotography. This is probably the best low-budget astrophotography lens around. That, on top of everything else, means it still has to come highly recommended.